absolutely delighted that Charlie Hartwell will be leading this discussion. And he will be starting us off in true fashion. So I'll let you take it away, Charlie.
Thank you, Zach. What a great group. I've known the people on this panel for several years. It's just an honor to be with them today, and it's an honor to be with you. And I want to just, before we start, ask a question and just show of hands. 4 years ago, raise your hand if you had a meditation practice. And do you have a meditation practice today? More hands are going up. And would you be willing to start our panel with a 2-minute meditation? Just kind of disconnect and get centered and connect with a very old technology that we each have called our lungs. So if you can just put, both feet on the floor and straighten your back, and you can choose to have your eyes open or your eyes closed. There's no right way to do this, but just pay attention to your in-breath and your out-breath. And just try to really connect to yourself, what you're experiencing right now. And if your brain's having a lot of thoughts, that's okay. There's no right or wrong. Going to do another 45 seconds or so. So just continue to pay attention to your breath, your in breath and your out breath. And if your eyes are closed, when time feels good, just open your eyes. Back to the stage, and we'll start talking with this amazing group. So before we get into the content, I just want to have everyone on the stage to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are and how they got to where they are today, and to talk about 1 or 2 benefits that their mindfulness practice has had and how long they've had a mindfulness practice. And I'll start. I'm Charlie Hartwell. I'm from Minneapolis. I'm the operating partner of Bridge Builders Collaborative, which is a group of investors that have come together to invest in the space of mind training. So we're helping to invest in companies that are helping people to connect more deeply to themselves so they can live happier, healthier lives. We don't define what happiness is for people. For some, it might be better sleep or less stress or better response to a medical condition. But we're really passionate about finding entrepreneurs and supporting those entrepreneurs to build companies that have social good, but also have the potential to become large enterprises. There's a group here that are some of the most seasoned entrepreneurs and investors in this. Tim represents Mayfield, an investor in the space. And I'll start with you, Rich, and we'll just go down.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Rich Fernandez. I'm the co-founder of a company called Wisdom Labs. We focus on science-based tools for thriving in the workplace and really put an emphasis on mindfulness and compassion-related learning solutions. Our aim is to make work cultures places that are happy, healthy, wise, and compassionate. Started the company just a few years ago, organizational psychologist by training. Like I said, we really emphasize bring the blend of science, mindfulness, and then kind of business relevance. You asked a question about mindfulness practice and our own personal practice. It's just been a part of my entire adult life, starting from freshman year in college, some nearly 30 years ago, dating myself, with meditation and martial arts practice. And that's pretty much carried through. I guess the interesting twist to the story that I could share is that those tools were really critical for me in terms of navigating life, in terms of responding versus reacting to challenges and stressors and difficulties that I had experienced. And that personal set of tools that I practiced about 10 years ago became then my vocation, because I was the head of learning at eBay and later at Google, and it was really clear to me that these tools that really impacted me personally were truly something that needed to be scaled out to the employee workforce, and hence we started Wisdom Labs. So really glad to be here.
Hello, I'm Tim Chang, one of the managing directors at Mayfield Fund, an early stage venture capital firm based here in Silicon Valley. I lead our consumer practice, and as part of that, I've done a fair amount of work in early wearables and quantified self and body hacking. You may have heard of companies like Basis, one of the first wearables that did 24/7 heart rate tracking, which we launched and sold to Intel. Companies like Lumosity, which were in brain training. And then lately, more companies involved in mental health like Lantern. A big fan of this whole space in general, but my path towards it was a little bit backwards. I kind of fell into it more from the early body hacking quantified self days. And as I started doing more exercise, there was the former coach of the UCLA weightlifting team actually developed this curriculum called the Happy Body. And what was interesting is after this intense weightlifting set, a big practice is meditation. And the purpose of that is to get your body back to baseline, to get out of the fight or flight response state. And I noticed it made a big difference for me after an intense, high intensity weight training. Your heart is pumping and everything, but even just 5 minutes of meditation, you were back to that baseline. It was this wonderful cocktail of all the endorphins and everything else. And then you just felt so set for the rest of the day. So that was sort of my start of that practice. Since then, I've seen a lot of other ways of flow state. And I'm pretty excited by the notion that anything in life, any pursuit can be and is a meditation, especially anything that can get you to flow state, whether it is through technologies, meditation, psychedelics, anything, entheogenic medicines, whatever, all those different vehicles to get to those states. And so I'm very excited to merge sort of new technologies and old wisdoms together to see, do they complement each other? Do they accelerate each other? And then do they democratize that access to everybody?
Hello, I'm Kelly McCabe. I'm the CEO and founder of eMindful. eMindful offers live programs in a webinar format. The programs are applied mindfulness. So, for example, some of our programs are programs to address metabolic syndrome, help people to quit smoking, manage diabetes, manage chronic pain, those types of things. So we have been selling our programs to employers. We sell directly, and we also sell through some insurance companies like Aetna and Humana and Optum. I came to meditation in 1996. I was working on Wall Street at the time in a technology role. And the two benefits that I have found, one is just that I'm happier. I had a long time thought that things had to be a certain way. I had to have a job, and I had to have a relationship, and I had to have certain things, certain ways in order to be happy. And what I've learned is that I actually can be happy regardless of the circumstances. So that was a big one. The other is that it's had a huge impact on my relationships. What I noticed was I often was doing things counter to my goal in a relationship. So if I wanted to be close to someone, and then I got into a discussion with them, I often would do things that were counterproductive to being close. I might raise my voice, I may say something hurtful, and I started to look at that and go, wow, well, why am I doing that? How is that achieving my goal? So in being more attentive to that, I've really found that it's significantly impacted my relationships. So.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, I'm Tracy Rosenthal Newsom, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at Interaxon. And we make Muse, the brain sensing headband and the meditation experience. I joined Muse actually about 9 months ago. I actually have a background in video games. I made a Rock Band, Guitar Hero, Dance Central, and I kind of came to this new world from a world where we were creating wellness and socially joyful experiences really in an exciting way for many, many years. And then I really found myself working myself into the ground, which is actually something that is pretty common in this world today. And I kept going and I kept going, and then all of a sudden about 3 years ago, I had a medical emergency. And that medical emergency actually required me to lay in one position for an entire week. So you can imagine being digitally disconnected from the world, what that did to my psyche. And one of the things that it did was it actually enabled me to really think about what was I doing? How could I create experiences in this world to help people that were chronic doers, which I was, and even to this day I still am. But actually by committing to a meditation practice, we can sit and be. And so one of the things that I really learned by going through this personal experience, and one of the reasons why I decided to join this community and this community here of people who really care about bringing mindfulness and meditation to people who are suffering, is that actually the balance of being and doing has been profound for me. I find actually I am really creative when I am being, but there is a moment in time where many of us here are really overdoing. And so I think it's something that at Muse, when we bring meditation to newbies, which is what we do, it's a gateway product, right? We're helping people learn how to meditate, and we're helping people learn how to commit to a practice. I actually, in my 20s and 30s, I'm dating myself also. I had an extensive yoga practice. I incorporated meditation in my life for a long time, and then I gave it up. I gave it up when the demands of work and family were really considerable. And so at Muse, it's very important to me to be building an experience for people who can help them commit to a practice, because that's how we actually change people's brains on a daily basis. And so thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Evian Gordon. I'm the founder of My Brain Solutions, which is an online platform to assess and train the brain that's mainly used by 40 or so Fortune 500 and name brand corporates. And how we came to mindfulness was essentially our underpinnings are we're a big data company, an international consortium, about 350 scientists from 28 countries. And we sort of collect everything about the brain and publish it and see what really matters. What really makes a difference in the brain, what really works. And so in the assessment that we have online and the 30 tools, they're kind of predicated on the data that we found in our database and online. And recently, we kind of started getting steady requests from our corporate clients to have them add to this 30 tools, which were essentially stress reduction tools, positivity tools, cognitive behavior therapy tools, also some gaming tools. Mindfulness clearly was just coming routinely and consistently, clients like Boeing, Cerner, and Aetna. So we did it. And as integrationists, which is essentially what we are, we took the standard mindfulness sort of tools that are out there and modules that are out there and integrate them into an app called Mindfulness Meditation, but we're brain people, so it's brain-based. So what has fascinated me personally, and just to see the impact of it, how quickly it's adopted in our corporate personnel sector, and also just myself personally and the people I work with most closely. I suppose the interesting thing is to see that adding some brain-based pieces to this wonderful technology and this wonderful age-old history of self-awareness, and kind of like with the spiritual dimension of being in the moment and having that increased self-awareness, that the technology side of it, in our case, it's having a breathing bar, at 6 breaths per minute, thanks to some of our scientific collaborators at Alliant University. And also adding specific aspects of cognitive behavior therapy and focused attention in the various modules, that the technology amplifies the experience if you want it to. And that's been a great joy for me to experience personally, and I think to get the testimonials that are amplifying that for some people, the technology marries really well with these wonderful ideas and practices of mindfulness meditation.
So I realized that I was not very mindful because I didn't answer my own question when I started out about my mindfulness practice. And just briefly, mine started nine or 10 years ago. Really have to credit my wife, who has been practicing yoga and mindfulness to getting me into this. I had an experience of about 12 years ago where my grandfather, who's the patriarch of our family, had died. My father was dying, my business was dying, and my first marriage had been dead for years, but I didn't really know it. And I got to a point where I needed to make some changes, and kind of what I describe is I just kind of woke up to the way I was living and to some of the stories that I had in my head. And I really decided to change behavior and to more fully awaken to my purpose and to live that out. And mindfulness has been an incredible tool. I went from a place where it was really hard to go to 1 or 2 minutes of meditation to where when I leave here, I'm going to go on a silent retreat at home by myself. I did this last year. I was scared to death. Like, what the hell am I going to do for a week? And I just spent a week by myself meditating. And my wife came home. She was gone. She said, "Man, you look younger." And so I've had a lot of benefits from the practice. So science was mentioned here, and I think any time that I've seen science being talked about, or meditation and mindfulness being talked about, science is always a place where it starts. And the science of mindfulness, I don't want to spend too much time on sort of the front end because there are now 1,400 studies. The work is not complete in the science of mindfulness, but it is ongoing. There are 500 studies a year. But I really want to talk about the experience of how the applications that you've developed, what is the science of the actual applications, and how are you measuring things? And for those of you that want to comment, just what's sort of the science on the back end of the products that you've developed? Kelly, do you want to maybe
I'd love
start
to.
and then?
So eMindful was kind of going along, figuring out how to offer live mindfulness classes. Back in 2009, we had actually done a fair amount of work, how to do it in a way that was engaging, making sure the compression technology was effective, et cetera. And then Aetna called us and said, "Gee, we'd really love to have a program that we could offer in the 55 minutes available at lunchtime or some similar sort of break in the day. And would you be interested, would eMindful be interested in working with them to create a program around stress and resilience that could be offered to both their employees as well as to their clients?" So we did do that. We did a randomized control trial. Duke, our chief scientific officer, is from Duke Integrative Medicine. She's been an NIH-sponsored PI on multiple occasions. So the research basically looked at, could this program reduce stress in this amount of time? It was a 12-week program, 55 minutes per week. Could it improve sleep quality? And did it have an impact on productivity? And then lastly, was there any sort of physiological change in pre and post? So briefly, we showed a 37% reduction in stress, which was a very large reduction. People were actually quite stressed out at that point in time. We showed about a 20% improvement in overall sleep quality, We did show improvement in productivity, and we've continued to show that, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. And then we used the M-wave, which is a measure of heart rate variability, and we saw, which is basically a measure of how well your heart is functioning and how well it reacts to stressors and how quickly it recovers from stressors. And we showed a statistically significant improvement in heart rate variability as well. So after that research was completed and it was published, Aetna went on to offer the program both internally and to their clients, and we've been collecting 6 years of data. And that data has very, very consistently shown significant improvements in stress, in sleep, in productivity. The M-wave we only used during the randomized control trial. And we've gone on to do research since then with University of British Columbia, Chatham University, Harvard, University of Calgary, and others. We're currently working with the Kessler Institute on a study on the impact of mindfulness on chronic pain in spinal cord injury patients. Based on what I've read and based on what I've seen and based on 6 years plus of data that we've collected, I would have to say that the science is pretty incontrovertible in terms of its positive impacts. We've gone on, since I have this Wall Street background, we've gone on to quantify the impact of stress on both health claims costs as well as on productivity. And we are able to calculate an estimated return on investment for our clients that incorporates both productivity, change in number of workdays lost per year, and estimated health claims costs. So.
Others? Evian?
Yeah, I think that's the evidence of mindfulness is incontrovertible and growingly so. I suppose I just want to add from an integrationist consortium point of view, there seems to be a shift, a movement in a sense, cautious, that's also just taking cognizance of the feedback from a small number of scientists who have done meta-analyses and who are suggesting that we really want to move the insights about mindfulness to a level that really explicates the mechanism and really what is happening. And so if I could summarize it in essence, my understanding of it is that one of the fears, I suppose, is that mindfulness does not go the same route as biofeedback, neurofeedback, brain happiness and brain stimulation, where the depth of science just never emerged to sufficient critical mass to really take it mainstream. And I think this is really got the potential to be mainstream. And so my distillation of it would be that there really is a shift beyond simply looking at decreased right amygdala activity or increased sort of anterior cingulate and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex type of activities, or immune system and all these other markers that are happening in isolation, towards a more integrative, holistic look at, I mean, in our case, we just happen to have a theory of the brain that starts off with safety first. So exactly how does it affect sort of stress reduction in terms of vagus versus fight, flight, but most critically, I'd say self-regulation. Like, what are the underpinnings of self-regulation in a really serious way? Bring the converging evidence together, and last but not least, being a company that deals a lot with the FDA in terms of new tests that are hopefully going to be the first of their kind in psychiatry, it's replication, replication, replication. And I think I see a shift towards the science of mindfulness moving to the equivalent of any type of high-level science, and I think that's going to augur well and differentiate it from the kind of other alternative approaches that didn't quite get to that level. So I think it's a really positive sign.
And I wanted to speak a little bit, building on that, to the edge cases, because that's where we play a little bit. So you've mentioned the integrative function and looking at the different parts of the brain that are affected, and then the other systems that follow from there. But what we're starting to measure is some of those other things like inflammation and immune system activation as coded in the chromosomes. So one thing we know from clinical research is that mindfulness can affect things like your level of inflammation as well as immune system activation or deactivation. both of which are huge precursors to metabolic syndrome. So if we could get down to the level of taking blood and looking at those chromosomal markers of inflammation or immune system activation or deactivation, which are clearly marked on RNA chromosomes, there's 53 of them that code for that. It's like the source code of your body. Then we could start to look at what the effect of things like chronic stress are all the way down to the level of the body. Because the experience of stress, you can report on it, but you could be an inaccurate reporter, right? And so survey intelligence only takes us so far. So the body doesn't lie. And if you can have great survey intelligence together with some of these epigenetic markers and some of the robust neuroscience, then you could start to really play with a lot of data that then I think also triangulates and gets you out towards even more compelling use cases around ROI and cost savings and productivity gains and so forth. But this is a kind of call for looking at kind of the frontiers of science as well as the integrative piece of it.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add to that, one of the things that Muse is doing, we have a portable EEG device. So we are actually working with over 100 different research partners right now. And we can actually bring something that is portable, easy to wear to populations that don't come into the lab, right? We can take thousands and thousands of people out there doing exactly the same thing and begin to learn a lot more from a lot more quantity. So this is something that Muse is leading the way. We are working with a ton of different groups right now. It's very exciting to see what's coming back. I also think it's very, very early, actually, in this world. We talk about having 500 or 1,000 research studies, but when we look back at exercise and the last 30 years, there's really a lot of learning that still needs to happen, and I think it needs to be quite rigorous.
Gotcha. Should we move on to the next question? So the name of this session is Meditating Minds for Expanding Human Potential, and I wanted to ask the panelists, what does expanding human potential mean to you? And Tim, maybe if you're okay starting out with this one, because you're involved in the consciousness hacking community and the Institute for Noetic Sciences and many different things that you're supporting. Just interested in, what's your thought on that?
So I'd like to say that the second oldest industry is telling people or helping people become better versions of themselves, starting with fortune telling and soothsayers and oracles. It's really that cardinal question, why am I here? And so you're always paying other people to tell you that. And a big part of that is developing yourself. If you think of your own life as this hero's journey that you're on, trying to kind of figure out how to be the best possible version of yourself. This extends to the quantified self movement. Originally, it was just geeky people trying to figure out, hey, how do I hack my body? How do I understand the biosignals? With that, when I adopted it, it came down to just reprogramming how I thought about food. And now I just have these 12 foods I eat. And then after that, it just all dialed in. And so that convinced me any human being on the planet can have a six-pack. Your body's engineered for that. Keep on that path. And if you can apply that methodology to everything, what does a six-pack of the mind look like? What does a six-pack of the soul, the emotion look like? I think very similar practices kind of emerge. And so I think a lot about it. Just one, fulfilling potential at every level, physical, emotional, spiritual, but then eventually figuring how we transcend our own biology. And this is that whole battle that you're battling all the signals of your reptilian brain, your monkey brain, your ego, all these sorts of things. And we always use that term ego death. We're trying to bring it in balance, trying to figure out how to step out of it, right? And so in many ways, to me, expanding human potential is how we hack our own biology through a lot of technologies. There'll be synthetic biology, but also these mindfulness practices, behavioral technologies, social technologies, chemical technologies, et cetera, where we figure out how to step beyond the motivating impulse drivers of the ego, which is usually fear and all these other things. And not to get too abstract, but for me, I just found basically there's these two root motivating forces at any given moment. It's either fear, driven by ego, or it's sort of this acceptance, empathy, love, if you want to call it. And that's the eternal yin-yang of the nature of the universe, reality, and on our lives. And if technologies help us become aware of that, you have the choice then every moment to pick which operating system you want to work from. So that's sort of the way I view where this is now and how technology can play a role in this.
Could I jump in there too?
Yeah.
So because I wore this shirt, right? Because they're playing tonight. The Golden State Warriors, if you don't know, are our local basketball team. They were the world champions last year, yeah? And they are the winningest team in NBA history, okay? Now, and I'm not just getting up here rooting for my home team. It's actually topical. which is that their team values. Does anyone know what they are? Can you shout them out? Anyone know? Joy. What else? Mindfulness, compassion, and competition. This is the winningest team, 73 wins this year, in the history of the sport, right? And so this is something they live and breathe. And I love, to your point, just to kind of connect this, what Tim is saying, to kind of the outcomes in the world, right? This is an operating system. This is the team's culture. This is the team's DNA. This is what they set out to do. This is how they do it. Right? And this is, I believe, the result. And they're also, the strength in numbers is a little play on the way they operate as an organization, because they're super analytical. I think they just won an award for most use of and most effective use of analytics. So in terms of human performance and optimization and expanding to our fullest potential, I think there's a lot here. And when we think about those three things that they lead with, joy, compassion, and mindfulness, right? Those are capacities that we don't typically associate high-performance teams, organizations, athletics with, but increasingly, and this might go to the next question, I think that's where it's all going.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take it down a level to the regular human being. And that is, when I look at the core of how we can meet our greatest human potential, and that is anybody. It is really the connection of your mind and your body. And so one of the things I think about in meditation, and when we're teaching meditation through our Muse tool to beginners, it's about giving them feedback. It's about giving them feedback of where they are in the given moment, and how we can learn to be in the moment today. So if we look at our society today, we aren't all professional athletes, and many of us don't have the discipline that you do, Tim, right? But a lot of us that are out there, right, that are struggling with the sort of reckless amount of information and stimuli that are hitting us on a daily basis, we too can meet our human potential. And this is something that I think is really critical if any of us are out there building products for the masses. We need to understand that they are also struggling and they can meet their human potential too. And so when we begin to offer user experiences that resonate within them, that connect their bodies and their minds together, they too can create that human potential.
So it's a great question and great answer, all of you. And if I could just add the brain-related context, we like to follow what the literature is appealing to in the meta-analysis studies. For example, for those of you, the one, if I had to choose one of the many, it'd probably be Psychological Bulletin in 2012, where they really appealed to maximize potential and including mindfulness, to have a theory. Whatever it is, it can be wrong, but it's sometimes helpful to have a scientific context. And so in our case, the theory is what's called the brain 1, 2, 4, that safety first is 1, 2 is non-conscious and conscious processing, as part of 4 is self-regulation. So the point is, what we try and do is self-empower people as much as possible with a really simple theory, a distillation of the literature, not some idiosyncratic thing that we sort of made up because it sounds cool. And I'm not saying people do that, I'm just saying it's philosophically so enticing, the whole field of self-awareness and the sort of, especially the spiritual dimension of it. But to keep it sort of tractable, have the theory and then give people the tools and let them find the tools that work for them. We've seen that people are so varied, like people have a negativity bias, want very different tools, like much more related to immediate stress reduction, than people who have a positivity bias. They really do have a better risk tolerance. So that's in essence, I'd say, Charlie, is the idea of having a framework, having tools, and empowering people to find what works best for them to maximize their potential, particularly with regard to self-regulation as it relates to mindfulness.
I would just add one small bit, which is I think human potential is being all that you can be. And I think we limit ourselves by what we think we can be. And in fact, a lot of what mindfulness is about is examining your thoughts and seeing if they're actually true. And I think that could really have a very profound impact on the world and on the way we live if people actually examined their thoughts, which are oftentimes based on things that aren't accurate, then they act on those thoughts. So that's what I would add.
That's great. Wow, I kind of want to like go out to dinner afterwards and continue
Yeah,
the conversation.
that would be awesome.
So I had the opportunity to talk with someone from a Fortune 20 company who's in employee wellness several weeks ago. And they started talking about how they're viewing their employees as like human energy systems and spiritual beings. And I was like, holy crap, this is happening in organizations. I couldn't believe it. But Rich, you were just talking about the Golden State Warriors, and everyone on this stage is really they're either investors in or pitching to business customers. And I'm really interested to get your feedback as to why different corporations are buying, engaging their employees in mindfulness practices.
So, I used to work at Google, and they had this philosophy that that they aspired to create the happiest, healthiest, and most productive workforce on the planet. And the idea is you can't get to number 3 if you don't invest in 1 and 2. So it's actually the business of business to invest in health and happiness. That's not something that sort of happens outside of the workplace. And that's more and more true with the collapsing, line between private and between work and home. And then the sustained pace and intensity that you talked about, Tracy, the 24/7, always on, anytime, anyplace, anywhere culture that we live in. So how do you separate the signal from the noise there and be effective in terms of your ideas, in terms of productivity, in terms of collaboration? So overall, I'd say it's the changing nature of work and the workplace that's prompting learning or thought leaders in these companies to really look for different types of solutions. And then if they're evidence-based, and as Kelly and others were saying, and Evian, there's a pretty compelling body of research that suggests that mindfulness and other contemplative practices, the exercise of compassion and certain other kind of positive spectrum activities really do make a material difference in terms of people's experience, in terms of people's productivity, and then in terms of the culture. So I think they're increasingly turning to these solutions as kind of a bona fide way as the next, not just best, but next practices in workplace effectiveness.
The other angle seems to be also as a cost driver, especially on the benefits and the insurance side. I think people are starting to realize too, if all systems are in balance from mental, emotional, everything else, that will start to lead to lower healthcare costs overall, right? Because it all ties together. If you're stressed out all the time at work, that's going to mean you don't sleep well. If you don't sleep well, the risk of getting ill goes up. All those things holistically tie together. So there is a ROI argument you can make as well. It even applies, I think, to eventually the corporate cafe and the corporate snack bar, where if there's mindful eating as well, that will also feed into this holistic picture.
That's great.
So we talk with a lot of organizations, all different sizes. They fall into maybe different buckets. One bucket is what I refer to the California company that totally understands mindfulness, embraces it wholeheartedly, and wants everyone being able to practice mindfulness whenever they feel the need. So I love those kind of companies. But then there are companies that are, there are some people in the company who understand mindfulness, have practiced mindfulness, embrace mindfulness, but they've got a bunch of compatriots who haven't. And they're trying to encourage those people to support it. And so when we come into those types of companies, we're dealing with the importance of the evidence base, of course. And so those are companies that are motivated by costs, but truly they're also motivated by wanting their, human capital to be as happy and healthy and productive as possible. So I think we were kind of fortunate, really, that we had selected some of the instruments that we use for measuring. But so lucky us, we have data that shows, reductions in stress actually have a very direct correlation to improvements in productivity and reductions in sleep problems or improvement in sleep. And when you can put this kind of data in front of a group that's not so sure about mindfulness, it's great to be able to say, well, gee, if you give them 55 minutes off, you're going to get 47 minutes back. But we've done this longitudinally, and we see that that number actually goes up over the course of a year, and you're going to get somewhere north of 45 hours back, for this relatively minor, 10 or 12-hour investment. So that really just comes down to mathematics as well. So there's a combination of people who want to see the science, who want to see the data analysis, and does it really work? And and understandably so. There have been a lot of products that have come out that were health and wellness products that didn't necessarily have any sort of an impact, and companies have a fiduciary responsibility to spend their money in a way that makes sense and promotes some kind of an ROI. And then there are, the companies who are yawning while we're talking about mindfulness, and they have absolutely no idea. And I think to myself, I'm coming back next year. So.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the things we've been hearing from our Muse for Professionals program. So what we discovered after releasing a consumer product was that there are so many professionals and small businesses out there that are actually using meditation practices with their clients. And so one of the things that happened, and it was somewhat of a surprise to us initially, was that we had mental health practitioners, we have executive coaches, we've got sports psychologists, all coming to us and asking us, could you please make another product for us? And what that is an adherence product. So what people really are needing is help in consistency, right? They need to know when they recommend a meditation regime to a client, whether that's a patient or whether that's an employee or an athlete, that they actually are adhering. And so we made an online dashboard. We're in beta with that right now. And it's really, really interesting and fun to be working with these small businesses who are using it with challenges. We've got corporate programs that are coming in and doing Muse workshops, but we actually have, a lot of mental health practitioners who are just recommending a meditation practice with someone right now who's suffering in some way in their life. And that is extending that relationship for that clinician, for the psychologist, or actually at addiction clinics. We've seen quite a few mental health clinics actually coming to us and bringing in Muse into their program. So there's a lot of different ways that we can measure people's experiences using the Muse platform, but we have found that adherence is actually the most important thing that people need to see right now.
So for us, it's pretty consistent. I'd say the 43 or whatever it is, large corporates that we deal with, it's a similar kind of dynamic. All decision making we see as brain 1 to 4 is what's conscious and what's non-conscious. And non-consciously, it's kind of like the brain's become cool, and mindfulness is a fad. I mean, I've never seen such a buzz. Yeah. So all corporates, you don't have to explain to them what mindfulness is, even if they don't know what it is, they love it. And so that's the non-conscious impulsive buy side of it. But they don't buy on that basis alone, because it's bought for, in our case, we're an online product, not face-to-face, so they purchase it for every employee, whether they use it or not. Price per employee per month, and some of them have been using it for 5 years. We've never lost a client yet. But the interesting side is the conscious decision-making. So my ranked order of it would be focused on stress first, stress reduction, what's the evidence, and then I'd say the second thing is resilience. And resilience has been the catch cry in the larger corporate sector for quite a while now, in terms of exactly what you said about human capital. And then increasingly, I think just self-empowering people to find, people use different words, wellness, well-being, but essentially they really are now looking for a more holistic outcome from people to find, I think I'm back to your original question, Charlie, it's like, how do you really expand people's abilities, their effectiveness? If you took at the Kessler World Health Organization scale of presenteeism or absenteeism, and last but not least, it is all about the ROI, for them to actually get it and adopt it at the scale and really push it. And the ROIs are still early days, but they're now starting to share with us their actual claims data. So it's just a matter of time before we start getting into the deeper science and the more serious proof points. But that's the sort of ranked order that they all seem to go through.
So I've had a couple others that I want to add just based on my experience talking to companies. One, and I think it's all related, but one is innovation. So when you're connected to yourself, your ideas are going to come out, you're going to be more creative. I see people who are doing this in team meetings just to enhance the entire, to enhance the meeting and make it more productive. Creativity is another reason why some organizations engage. But what's interesting hearing all of you is that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution here. There are different reasons why different companies at different times might engage in these practices and different benefits. And I just wanted to shift. I worked in corporate America. How many folks here have worked in corporate America? I don't know if you've ever had sort of the flavor of the month club. The CEO stands up and says, we're going to do this, and then 2 months later, you're not going to do this anymore, and we're on to the next thing. And we've talked about, you said it, Evian, that it's a fad and it's crazy. And my first question is this just a bright shiny object that corporations are now buying and they're going to move on to something else? Is this just a fad? But the next question is, assuming the answer to that is no, and it may be yes, what's beyond this? Where do we go from here?
So I'll start.
Okay.
First, I don't think it's a fad, and I think actually this community here we all have a big job to do, and that is beyond just this community and beyond the word mindfulness is really helping people understand brain health, right? And we have for 30 years or 35 years begun to really understand our physical health, but really the extension of brain health is what's going to continue. And I think that's why mindfulness and meditation is going to become something that is even more prevalent. But I think the word that came to mind, Charlie, when you sent the questions around, and Rich, you mentioned this earlier, is compassion. And in mindfulness, we begin by understanding ourselves, but really when we begin to look at others, we expand the world. And I think that is really the next frontier. And I think as we, in our work places, in our families, and in our communities, as we cultivate compassion, we begin to create these amazing dynamics, right, in a workplace where teams are working and caring for each other and holding one person up and helping somebody else really exceed in a way that's just phenomenal, right? And as we teach that in schools, we will begin to see, compassion coming up into the next generations. And personally, that's what came up for me, and I'd love to hear what happens for the rest of you. But I think it's really important as a society, when we look at the challenges that are out there, how do we as a group of thought leaders bring cultivation of compassion into the next decade?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. Yeah, can you hear me okay? I couldn't agree with that more. I think that, as one of my teachers, Sharon Salzberg, says, compassion is an emergent quality of mindfulness. So when you connect and pay attention, you also see the interconnection or interdependence of all things. As another teacher of mine says, Thich Nhat Hanh, we all exist in a state of interbeing. We all inter-are. Okay, so not to get too esoteric about this, but the notion is that, in being able to be mindful and really exercise compassion, we really see the way we have an impact on everything around us. And that is huge for teams and organizations. And it goes to our core values. Do we care to do that? Is that an even important thing? I would submit that what's next for mindfulness and what's beyond mindfulness is the resolution of unproductive conflict. And we get there through compassion.
I would jump on the it's not a fad bandwagon. And that's for a couple reasons. One is we actually have been working with some clients. Hartford is one that comes to mind. They spent 3 years looking at this, evaluating it, comparing it to other stress and resilience products. And after 3 years, rolled it out to their population. But we're actually working with a number of Fortune 100 companies who are putting together strategies to roll mindfulness out globally. So they have, a 2017 plan, a 2018 plan. I don't think that having, worked in corporations myself, those types of initiatives that are across the board, that have multi-year strategies behind them, that the company is going to put significant resources behind, is something that's going to be, the flavor of this month or next month. Might be the flavor of this decade, but I definitely think it's around, for at least the next 5 to 10 years. So. Oh, one other thing, actually. I have done some work with various insurance companies, as well as just consumer companies. And I've heard multiple very large companies say, we're planning to be a leader in the mindfulness industry. And I went, wow, there's an industry.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that because we work with sector diverse companies from manufacturing to high tech to, consumer facing organizations. So, and they all see that, they all see that it's a way to bring their values to life, I think.
I want to continue, and at the same time, we really wanted to open. We started with the audience participation of you, practicing, and I want to end with the opportunity for you to engage again with the panel if you have questions. I see a hand, a couple hands.
It's been really great learning about the different applications of meditative and mental health opportunities that are currently in place. So first of all, thank you. I'm curious about the relationship between virtual reality and mindfulness. As far as I understand mindfulness, it's a lot about becoming present and fully inhabiting the moments in which we live. And whereas virtual reality perhaps is offering alternatives to reality. And so the question that I'm posing is, do you see the relationship between VR and mindfulness as fundamentally at odds, perhaps complementary, or maybe more neutrally related?
I can take a crack. I've been looking quite a bit at VR, AR. Like all things, I think it's a tool, so it's going to matter what application and intention you bring to it, but it could be a tremendously accelerating tool, I think, for mindfulness or perception expansion opportunities, let's say. And so I've seen some interesting applications of VR being used for, say, post-traumatic stress disorder treatment, being used for generating empathy. There was an art project once where a VR artist simulated what it's like to be scared, schizophrenic paranoid, because she wanted to figure out why her sister committed suicide. And you spend 30 seconds in there and suddenly you have a tremendous amount of empathy for people who deal with that. And so VR is an amazing tool to be able to take you out of your current framework of how you see things into another one. Some even say VR is the ultimate empathy machine, such that you can sort of see from someone else's eyes, what their experience is like. And then being able to combine this with mindfulness practices be really interesting. Just like, I think one of the powers of Muse is it helps people onboard onto mindfulness more quickly. VR potentially maybe could do the same. So that's my hope for it.
Yeah, I just want to add, I agree with you. Technology is a tool, and it is a tool for us innovators to create user experiences that are appropriate for particular applications. And I'm really excited about the potential of what can happen in VR. If we think about mindfulness, it isn't just closing our eyes and focusing on our breath, but it's actually being mindful. And so there are a ton of different amazing user experiences that we could create in beautiful environments that would help people get to a mindful place. And so I think there's a lot of potential in that area.
Cliff? So I have a question about evaluating programs and the role of active control conditions that are very carefully matched, both in terms of the enthusiasm of the interventionist or the teacher, as well as the utility of the content. We now have some peer-reviewed studies with active control conditions where there's effectively no difference between carefully matched mindfulness-based stress reduction and a health enrichment program that's been published by Melissa Rosenkrantz and Richie Davidson's group. Acute social evaluative stress is not different whether you've gotten mindfulness training or gotten their health enrichment program. So in terms of providing opportunities for corporate self-awareness and creativity and flourishing, perhaps poetry, writing, photography, release time to volunteer in the community, experience compassionate engagement rather than practice compassion meditation. What are the active control comparisons that are being put head to head with these programs?
So I think that's the kind of question that's really going to augur well for taking mindfulness meditation to where it should go, to the serious end of like what really works, rather than being a sort of overly magnifying the virtues as great as they are too early. Fantastic question. You know, if you take the analogous example with neurofeedback, you know, really just brain training yourself, the brain actually trains itself with electrical brain function, such as products such as Muse, which is a terrific product, by the way. 17 studies so far have tried to find a placebo control for neurofeedback and have not come up with a single example where neurofeedback beats placebos. Now, there is a huge amount of evidence that neurofeedback is an incredibly powerful tool. And so the answer is there's a lot of thought that needs to go into really controlling placebos. That's number one. Number two is there is a shift, and I know that from just dealing with the FDA at the moment for the first test in psychiatry, which I won't bore you with the details, but what's really important is comparative effectiveness. Many of the studies are being set up not to try and set ourselves up for defeat, which there may not actually be a perfect control for a tool such as powerful as mindfulness, which is multidimensional in its virtues, and you may not have a simplistic way to have a placebo where you know, all the placebos, you're looking at them, we're just doing, you know, relaxation but not really being mindful. Well, who knows what people are doing with their 85 billion highly interconnected neurons and 100 chemicals sloshing around in there. Goodness knows what the brain is actually, and the mind is actually doing and how well you can control for it. But comparative effectiveness is a very straightforward way that the FDA and HHS and NIMH understand, and the top academics in terms of the deeper statistics that is emerging in the sector, to really just compare various types of mindfulness, mindfulness with yoga, mindfulness with cognitive behavior therapy-based mindfulness. But it requires big numbers as well. What we have found, we just ran a $20 million study in depression for the first depression test. It required 1,800 subjects, 1,000 in the training set, 700 subjects in the replication. So it just can't be done with these little small studies that find a p-value, and I'll end off by the data's in the evidence of the meta-analysis that I referred to earlier, of which there are many, but just for brevity's sake, for that Psychological Bulletin article, they looked at 600 studies, and 3/4 had to be thrown out in the analysis because they had inadequate controls, exactly what you're saying, and inadequate methodology. So I think being deeply sort of critical about and smart about the control or doing comparative effectiveness studies seems to be one pragmatic way forward to get that right. And the effect size is like absolutely crucial. It's terribly weak at the moment. It's 0.27 in that study. So that's explaining, you know, less than 5% of the variance. But yeah, but look, having said that, as you said, there's fantastic evidence that at a face validity level, mindfulness is an extraordinary benefit, way more obviously than was initially the case in neurofeedback, biofeedback, and brain training, but it needs to be built upon and taken to the next level with the kind of probing questions that you're asking.
So I'm just going to say, take one more question, and then we'll end the panel. Back over there.
Hello. This question is to Ms. Rosenthal Newsom in response to the question from Mr. Hartwell on the flavor of the month. And as best I understand, your response was that compassion is the actual draw, or the next level, or the thing that will sustain it through the fad. And I guess my question is, how does Muse train compassion specifically? I see how it might help one identify and sustain attention, but it seems rather devoid of a certain philosophy, and the compassion would probably come from a philosophy, I suppose. And I heard mention of Salzburg and Thich Nhat Hanh as these people have philosophy. They so does Muse have that?
As a secular product, we really don't associate ourselves, with any specific, let's say, religious or Buddhist philosophies. That being said, two-part. One is my response about compassion actually has to do with the entire field, and that is where can we take this in the future? Currently, you're absolutely right. With Muse right now, we're focused on a focused attention meditation practice, which is a really foundational beginning of where we want to teach somebody mindfulness. But what we're doing actually is we are helping people become curious about their experience. And we're leading them into a way in which they can look at their experience, their subjective experience, after the fact in their post-session data, and really begin to become aware of what is going on. Now, in terms of compassion practices, I would absolutely love to create compassion practices inside Muse, and I actually see that as something that is absolutely something that we will integrate in the future. And one of the things that we're doing right now actually is bringing on more and more collections into our product. We actually have a partnership with eMindful that's going to be coming out in the next month, and over the summer and into this year, we'll be bringing more and more collections from a variety of teachers into the product. And compassion is something that is very important to me, and I think not just in the community, which was what we were talking about here, but actually as we look at the way in which we want to bring the philosophy of really understanding yourself. You know, we have a measurement tool, right? So there's often a lot of times where people are asking, well, you're measuring my brain waves, am I doing a good job? There is no good in meditation. It's just, where are you today? We're looking for a non-judgmental approach to being curious at what your experience is, and we want to help you with that. And so I feel like that is the way in which we bring compassion to help you understand yourself. And I hope in the future we'll even have compassion practices. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for being attentive and for your questions, and I want to thank the panel for all being here. Great responses, great
Thank you, Charlie.
conversation.
Thank you.